Beck's mother wrote me a letter. She said her son had called her right after I had spoken to him, and she wanted to thank me. She said, "You may have saved his life, and I thank you, Dr. Angela."
In that one story, she painted a more human picture of him than the entire media did during his career, you know. People were afraid of Tupac. The media made him like he was this scary thing, and she talked about him like he was a young man in a confusing and difficult situation. And that's kind of what I like about Dr. Angela, because I know I'm not perfect and whatever, but it's something that she can look at me and she can kind of put the picture together. She knows I'm just a dude trying to figure it out.
That's David Chappelle talking about Maya Angelou and Tupac Shakur. And I think that's a very good place to start this conversation because it centers us on the idea of humanity. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Chad Hyatt. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am a K-12 district instructional coach for the Metropolitan School District of Washington Township and an education consultant. I've been an educator for about 25 years in the cities of Indianapolis, Las Vegas, and Baltimore City. I'm also a member of the International Baccalaureate Educator Network with extensive work in inquiry, curriculum, youth-led action, and student agency. If you'll be live tweeting today, I invite you to use the hashtag INCLC and the hashtag Hope Agency Humanity. When it comes to equity in education or culturally responsive teaching, I recognize that I am not the expert. I have been studying and discussing it for several years now, but recognize that I still have much to learn from the great authors like Jeff Duncan Andrade, Albert Bandura, Bettina Love, Ghodie Mohammed, Russell Quaglia, Alfie Kohn, and David Perkins. Each of those has already been instrumental in my work. Today, I'm inviting you into my so-called learning lab, where I have been and continue exploring ideas. I'm connecting these ideas to the work that I'm mired in and trying to advance my own notions of these ideas in practice. I chose the CLC Summer Institute specifically because of the welcoming nature of this group for sharing and exploring together. I am here today to share a bit of myself and my thinking with you. I would like to invite you to engage in journaling, sketchnoting, concept mapping, or any other means of representing your learning and connecting your ideas during this presentation. While I have created specific opportunities throughout for you to pause the recording and reflect, feel free to do so whenever needed. I have also included some QR codes so that you might want to have your QR code reader app open and ready. If you're like me, your mind is wrapped in a million places and it's hard to get focused. So I think it'd be a great thing to get our journey started today by getting focused. So I'm inviting you to close your eyes, to relax your shoulders, let your whole body just kind of collapse into your chair, or couch, or wherever it is you're joining us from today. And let's start thinking about our breathing. Go ahead and hear your breathing, feel your breathing. Let's go ahead and take a deep breath in, hold it, slowly exhale. Let's do that again. And one more time. Deep breath in, slowly exhale. I'm hoping that that will help you feel focused and ready to learn. So let's get started. Today we'll seek to do three things. First, we'll work to describe why hope is critical to agency and our sense of humanity. Then we will seek to explain why the oppression of agency is thriving in schools. And finally, we will seek to identify how we can transform our schools and classrooms to be centered on hope, agency, and humanity. In order to get our minds started, let's start with a short clip called "A Million Dreams." You might recognize the lyrics from The Greatest Showman, but this clip is a cover of that song and is being sung by Alex Boyer and Annie Schultz. The clip is only 37 seconds, so it is just enough to inspire our thinking for this recording. If you need more inspiration, I have included the QR codes here for the full song. Let's have a listen. A million dreams. That's what our students come to us with. So it's time for our first reflective pause. Stephen Covey helped to bring the concentric circles of control, influence, and concern to the masses. Today, I want you to think about your home and or school life. What are 2 to 3 things that might exist in each of these circles? Why did you choose those things? Why did you place them where you did? What's something that you'd like to see move inward? And why isn't it already there? On a scale of 1 to 10, how much hope do you have in moving it inward? And finally, how does that make you feel? As you work on this, I would like to ask you to please make sure you have it available for the final reflection, as we will be returning to it. This is a great time to pause your recording and complete this reflection and rejoin when you're ready. Our first objective today is to describe why hope is critical to agency and our sense of humanity. And in learning this objective, we are going to explore 4 questions. What is hope? What is agency? What is self-efficacy and what is collective efficacy? What is the relationship between hope and agency? How does recognition of our own agency and self-efficacy help us recognize our own humanity? I think any conversation about hope has to start with the work of Dr. Jeffrey Duncan Andrade. Dr. Andrade described 2 types of hope: false hope and critical hope. Let us begin with false hope. He said this type of hope can be described as 3 things: optimism, mythical hope, and hope deferred. By optimism, Dr. Andrade was referring to the individualistic nature of hope. This is the type of hope where people tell you to pick yourself up by your bootstraps, even though it ignores the inequities in our society. Mythical hope, that's where there's this false narrative that just because we've had a Black president, that we have ascended to arriving at the plateau we've been seeking. It ignores past truths. And Dr. Andrade refers to this as hope on a tightrope. And finally, there's hope deferred. And this is where we blame the system. We say we dream of a collective utopia where we believe that children will just ascend on their own to the next social class. This type of hope produces chronic stress in individuals because of the accumulating negative stressors and the few resources to cope. Sometimes this false hope is all we have to offer when we are unwilling to confront the harsh realities of social inequality within our pedagogy, where we are unwilling to cultivate students' control of destiny. It has been said that hope should be thought of as control of destiny, an actively present sense of agency. I say, hope is not a strategy, but it just might be the birthplace of action. And action is at the core of agency. Any conversation about agency has to begin with the work of Albert Bandura. He defined agency as the human capability to influence one's functioning and the course of events by one's actions. The International Baccalaureate Organization has gone on to say that agency in schools is when students use their own initiative and will and take responsibility and ownership of their learning. They direct their learning with a strong sense of identity and self-belief, and in conjunction with others, thereby building a sense of community and awareness of the opinions, values, and needs of others. Bandura describes 4 requirements for agency: intentionality, forethought, self-reactiveness, and self-reflectiveness. By intentionality, Bandura says, can you see the big picture? Can you see the plan? Do you have a strategy to get there? Forethought, this is where we start setting goals. Okay, some of those shorter term goals, visions for success. Self-reactiveness, this is our motivation. This is our skills that we own in order to get going. And then finally, self-reflectiveness. This is where we monitor our progress and adjust our strategy along the way. Bandura says that people exercise their influence through 3 forms of agency: individual agency, proxy agency, and collective agency. An agency that's exercised individually, people bring their influence to bear on what they can control. In proxy agency, they influence others who have the resources, knowledge, and means to act on their behalf to secure the outcomes that they desire. And in the exercise of collective agency, people pool their knowledge, their skills, and resources, and act in concert to shape their future. This is the type of agency it often takes to address some of those things that we've identified in our circle of concern. Everyone has agency. It's not given to you, but what is developed is our confidence. And this, Bandura calls our self-efficacy. It is our belief in our ability to influence events that affect our life. To me, this is where mental mindsets meet action. It is the foundation of human inspiration, intrinsic motivation, performance accomplishments, and emotional well-being. Unless people believe they can produce desired effects by their actions, they have little incentive to undertake activities or to persevere in the face of difficulties. Whatever other factors serve as guides and motivators, they are rooted in the core belief that one has the power to affect changes by one's actions. Self-efficacy impacts cognitive, motivational, affective, and decisional processes. As teachers, we can directly affect students' self-efficacy. I like to think about David Perkins' work through Harvard Project Zero and his dispositional view of intelligence. Here he identifies 3 factors: ability, which is our knowledge and skills in order to do the work; the sensitivity or the awareness of when we need to use our knowledge and skills, and then inclination or our motivation to begin the work. I like to think of this as knowing how to act, recognizing when to act, and being motivated to act. Bender also identified collective efficacy in 1993. More recently, John Hattie looked at the educational outcomes that were affected by collective efficacy. He found great promise. Hattie identifies collective efficacy as groups working together with evidence of their impact and belief that they cause the outcomes, that they influence the outcomes. Collective efficacy of a group is enhanced by social sensitivity. Are you aware of the proportion of turn taking going on with the group? Are you aware of the proportion to hear each other, to demonstrate that you have listened to others by paraphrasing and building off of what others have said? Each of those things adds to the collective efficacy of the group. So this brings me to one of my driving questions. How does recognition of our own agency and self-efficacy help us recognize our own humanity? To me, we can look at the work of Brene Brown, our sense of vulnerability in our work, our sense of self-worth. We can add on to that with the work of Daniel Pink in Drive, where we can analyze our situation. An agency is alive when we recognize and we have a purpose, that we have developed mastery of the skills and dispositions needed, and that we have a sense of autonomy. It all brought me to the conclusion that my humanity is my agency. Without a sense of agency, I have no hope. Hope's not a strategy, but it just might be the birthplace of action. And action is at the core of agency. This brings us to our reflective pause. Again, to get our brains synthesizing and projecting, let's start with a short clip from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. This is the part about the promissory note. I have included the QR codes here as well. The clip is just under 2 minutes, so it should be enough to inspire the synthesis of our thinking and project us into the next objective. Let's have a listen.
In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we've come to cash this check a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice.
What a powerful speech. For this reflective pause, we are going to consider the work of Edwin Hubble and how his work on the Hubble telescope gave us a new lens to see and understand the unseen. We can use this same idea to examine the lens that we have been using to see the Black, Indigenous people of color in our classrooms and schools regards to agency. How can we take another look? What might that look like for you? Again, I encourage you to pause the recording here and take some time to reflect. Our second objective today is explain why the oppression of agency is thriving in schools. We will use 3 sets of questions. How does recognizing another's agency allow us to also recognize their humanity? Why is the oppression of agency thriving in our schools? And what does research say about agency in regards to self-efficacy and collective efficacy? Let's return to Dr. Duncan Andrade's notion of false hope and dig a little deeper into the concept of hope deferred to think about why the oppression of agency is so prevalent in our schools. As part of his descriptor of hope deferred, Dr. Duncan Andrade says that hope deferred is all we have to offer when we are unwilling to confront harsh realities of social inequality with our pedagogy. We are unwilling to cultivate students' control of destiny. Instead of reflecting and changing teaching in ourselves, we tend to other Black, Indigenous people of color, a concept made popular through the works of Lisa Delpit and Bell Hooks. This can be an implicit and explicit bias that we have towards Black, Indigenous people of color. Yes, our brains are wired for survival, so bias is a natural process. But our amygdala can be hijacked just because people look different than we are. We have to understand that our brains are malleable and we can learn to think differently. Oftentimes, this othering leads to oppressive classifications. We'll use terms like those kids, those people, that class, that school, as if there's a difference between superiority and inferiority of people or classrooms or schools. This creates like dominant and subordinate roles for the people that we have there, which then leads to racism, classism, xenophobia, sexism, homophobia. And we have to realize that this evokes emotions and impacts the self-image of Black, Indigenous people of color. In her book, White Fragility, D'Angelo says, white people have been raised to not see, know, and love you. And until we do, we fail to see your humanity. This ultimately affects our image of the child. Reggio Emilia and Ivy schools have taught us that the child is competent, capable, worthy of hope and agency, worthy of being seen as human. But too often, this is not the case for those that we other. It's there we create just the opposite type of image. So where does all this come from? Luckily, the work of Peter Senge in his book, The Fifth Discipline, gives us a great tool called the ladder of inferences to examine the mental models that we have constructed over time. We have deeply rooted mindsets and beliefs. Our versions of reality are based on our perceptions of these truths. Our assumptions create blindness to our own implicit and explicit biases, as well as prejudicial and racist thoughts and actions. Our lack of cultural intelligence or situational awareness for it can create deficit mentalities towards others. In other words, we change how we see the world. Our constructed images of children dictate what we think students, particularly Black, Indigenous students of color, can and cannot do. This is prevalent in schools serving Black, Indigenous people of color. It is fueled by our mental models of those children, and I believe that it serves as a form of oppression through education. I believe there is oppression of agency in our schools. A key aspect of engagement requires students to connect new learning with previous learning. This is proven time and again by Hattie and Marzano in their research. An inequitable education for Black, Indigenous people of color does not value their funds of knowledge. Too often we have an assumption of a lack of prior knowledge or prerequisite skills. Too often we have an assumption that previous experiences are incompatible with classroom learning. This does not honor each child's individual funds of knowledge. I believe there is oppression of agency in schools due to Eurocentric standards, standardized testing, and accountability efficiencies that constrain and limit learning for Black, Indigenous people of color. I believe these constraints include scheduling for accountability and not brain-aligned learning, such as integration of subjects. I believe that pacing standards for coverage prohibits understanding. I believe we are too focused on skills in our instruction. I believe this model limits cultivation of identity, intellectualism, and criticality, as Ghodri Muhammad has laid out. I believe it limits learning about your history in your local community. I believe the oppression of agency in schools through Eurocentric standards, standardized testing, and accountability deficiencies lead to deficit narratives for Black, Indigenous people of color. Initiatives like are used to try to fix kids instead of fixing our instruction. Initiatives such as RTI often relegate the hopes of students of color to tier 2 and 3 interventions without critically interrogating tier 1 instruction for its bias and inequity. I believe that PBIS is used as a carrots and sticks approach to extrinsically motivate students of color when we fail to be motivated ourselves to create a significant, engaging, relevant, and challenging curriculum. I believe we could sit down and have a dialogue with students about what they need and proactively design classroom culture with this in mind and provide interventions that support meeting this need. Dina Simmons refers to initiatives such as SEL without a culturally responsive lens as racism with a hug. Again, oftentimes the goal of the program is to fix the kid and not fix the culture of our classroom. I believe that initiatives like behavior charts can be used for public humiliation and extrinsic control, and it is very possible with the right classroom culture that we can use a sense of agency to develop that intrinsic motivation. So now to turn the focus on ourselves, we can explore Bandura's moral disengagement theory. With it, we can seek out why we don't act more often on our own agency as teachers, specifically as white teachers. When we know the education being offered is often less than moral than the education being offered in schools with predominantly white students. Moral disengagement does not alter moral standards. Rather, it provides the means for those who morally disengage to circumvent the moral standards in ways that strip morality from harmful behavior and the responsibility for it. Bandura says the selective suspension of morality is due to the following positions. Behavior locus. This is where the righteous ends justify the harmful means. We will gladly sit and students down in our classrooms with worksheet after worksheet just to help keep them quiet and the classroom orderly. Another position is the agency locus. This is where we evade personal accountability for the harmful actions by displacing responsibility to others or dispersing it widely so that no one bears responsibility. We use phrases such as they, the district, society, or the system to justify our actions. Another one is the outcome locus. Here, the effects are out of sight, out of mind. So there's no perceived harm that has been done. Things are so far off. For example, we will teach reading in a way that does not promote the love of reading, and we will see or not be able to see students disengage from reading as early as middle school, high school, and for the rest of their life. And finally, there is the victim locus. This is where we exclude others from the category of humanity by divesting them of human qualities, or we attribute animal qualities to them. This is not okay. It is not good enough. We can do better, and research shows it. Dr. Russell Quagley has done extensive work on voice in schools. Here are some of his team's findings. He says that 53% of teachers say they have a voice in decision-making at their school. And when teachers have a voice in this decision-making, they are 3 times more likely to encourage students to be leaders and make decisions. He also goes on to say that only 52% of students believe teachers are willing to learn from them, and that only 47% of students say they have a voice in decision-making at school, even though in those same schools, 97% of teachers claim they encourage students to make decisions, and 83% say they actively seek out the ideas and opinions of students. There's something that's not matched up there. But there is hope. Research shows that when students have a voice, they are 3 times more likely to experience self-worth in school, 5 times more likely to be engaged in school, and 5 times more likely to have a sense of purpose in school. So Quaglia says it is now time for teachers to demonstrate to students that they are listening. They appreciate learning from the ideas and opinions of students. We need to listen. We need to make time to listen, make time to get feedback from students. We need to learn from our students, not get defensive during these communication. We need to embrace the vulnerability of the moment. We need to lead. We need to take action based on our learning. We need to incorporate the feedback from students into our lessons or make revisions. We need to advocate for students with colleagues and our principals. Here, Dr. Quagley goes on to share a few calls to action with us in regard to student voice and our role as teachers and leaders, and just what the outcomes can do for students' self-worth and engagement. I'll give you a few seconds here to look over these conclusions. This brings us to our next reflective pause. Again, to get our brains synthesizing and projecting. Let's start with a short clip from Tupac Shakur called The Rose That Grew from Concrete. The clip is only 1 minute, so it is just enough to inspire our thinking. If you need more inspiration, I have included the QR codes here, one for this clip and also one for the full song. Let's have a listen.
You wouldn't ask why the rose that grew from the concrete had damaged petals. On the contrary, we would all celebrate its tenacity. We would all love its will to reach the sun. Well, we are the roses. This is the concrete. These are my damaged petals. Don't ask me why. Ask me how.
For this reflective pause, we are going to consider the perspective of the Black Indigenous students of color in your classroom. We're going to step into their shoes to examine their experience, then step out of their shoes to consider our new thoughts and wonderings. Then step even further back and reflect on our own thinking and anticipate the work that lies ahead for you. Again, I encourage you to pause the recording here and take some time to reflect. For our final objective, we will identify how we transform our schools and classrooms to be centered on hope, agency, and humanity. We'll look at 4 sets of questions. What is hope, and why is it critical to agency and our sense of humanity? What does it mean to educate for agency and self-efficacy? What makes it equitable? How can the curriculum be designed for agency? What makes it equitable? And how might educating for agency relate to abolitionist teaching? In the song we just listened to, Tupac refers to youth that emerge in defiance of socially toxic environments. This is not a deficit mindset of their home, but yet it's a call out of systemic racism in society that was intentionally designed and purposed to privilege white people with no accountability and too much counterblame. Earlier, when thinking about false hope, Dr. Duncan Andrade identified the opposite to be critical hope. There are 3 elements of critical hope: material hope, which would be referred to as the cracks in the concrete; Socratic hope, which is the journey of the rose through the cracks; and then the audacious hope, the idea of solidarity, of all of the elements coming together, the right amount of sun, the right amount of rain, the right amount of soil mixed in there to make it happen. Material hope, or the cracks in the concrete. In our classroom, this is our quality teaching. It gives the students the tools that they need to break through those systemic barriers. It's about using the best of research to produce student growth across assessment measures. And it's our most significant material resource that we have to offer youth. It involves rigorous pedagogy and curriculum geared towards social justice. There is a false binary of an either or here in that situation, but it takes both. And it's also about connecting resources and networks to support the whole child. So we have to ask ourselves, what can we do to help everyone in our classrooms make and find the cracks in their concrete? Socratic hope is that journey through the cracks. Requires courage to pursue the painful path through the cracks to reach the surface. Socrates once said, All great undertakings are risky, and what is worthwhile is always difficult. Socratic hope prioritizes the humanization of students above all else. It makes us as teachers take the self-sacrifices in our own life, the same ones we expect of students. They're looking for us to walk the talk. So I ask you, how can our classrooms provide a caring and supportive forum for the journey through the cracks in the concrete? And the final aspect of critical hope is audacious hope, the solidarity. To share in the other's suffering and sacrifice ourselves for others. Their pain is our pain. Empathy and not sympathy. It's empathy combined with action to create compassion. It's where we defy the dominant ideologies of defense, entitlement, and preservation of privilege at the expense of policing, disposal, and dispossession of marginalized others. It's where we focus on helping students channel their inner rage and not just on managing students with these emotions. It's where we collectively struggle to replace the concrete completely with rose gardens. So I ask you, how do we educate for this type of hope and help to brighten the future of our world? I believe an equitable education for agency and self-advocacy requires us to move from a focus on reforming schools towards a focus on transforming schools. I ask you to not just be an ally, but be a co-conspirator, an abolitionist. I've included a QR code here where Bettina Love describes the difference between these three categories. I believe an equitable education for agency and self-advocacy requires us to move from a focus on compliance in schools towards a focus on community in schools. It requires us to set high expectations. We can collaboratively with students set goals, make action plans, and identify evidence. We can create essential agreements for the classroom instead of teacher-determined rules. We can build relationships between students and teachers and foster those relationships between students. We can use brain-aligned discipline instead of punishment. Our brains are wired for connecting to protect. We must help our students regulate and then relate and then reason. It has to be in that order due to the natural evolution of our brain. We need to move from just establishing procedures to developing routines. This is where the classroom starts to act like a well-oiled machine, where students have ownership in those routines and know when and how to execute them. We need to move from a focus on teaching towards a focus on learning. I believe an equitable education for agency and self-advocacy requires us to move from a focus on learning content towards a focus on learning to learn and a focus on learning to be. I say don't just assign, seek to apprentice your students. Imagine assigning them a graphic organizer for an assignment, but instead you teach them about thinking routines and types of thinking that they can choose that are necessary in the different situations. This is part of that situational awareness that David Perkins introduced us to. This also might be a commitment to philosophies such as workshop model. We use workshop model in reading and writing, and we confer with kids to help apprentice them as writers and readers. We can use the same model to apprentice students as mathematicians, scientists, historians, and athletes and artists. all across our curriculum. Now let's shift to curriculum design. I believe an equitable curriculum designed for agency starts with material hope. We are educating and cultivating the whole child with the tools they need. This is an education for knowledge, understanding, skills, and dispositions. It gives me the transferable tools to do the work and to believe in my agency. It's happening in schools with predominantly white students. It's powerful, and it's what our Black, Indigenous students of color need in all schools. I believe an equitable curriculum designed for agency integrates culturally responsive pedagogies, as Loretta Hammonds has laid out. These pedagogies, based on cultural archetypes, help move the focus from teaching to learning for my own comprehensible input and the construction of my own understanding. This increases my self-worth, improves my social emotional learning. It says that who I am is valued here in this classroom, and it promotes my agency. Some of the cultural archetypes that Hammonds discussed is collectivism versus individualism. In the United States, most of our classrooms are based on the ideas of individualism. However, our brains are wired for connection and interaction. So bringing in opportunities for collectivism, for learning from the group, is very important. The other archetype is the difference between oral and written traditions. Again, in the United States, we have a huge reliance on written traditions, but other cultures have a more focus on oral traditions. And actually, based on our brain's evolution, there is great power in storytelling because it has been a form of communication for literally tens of thousands of years. I believe an equitable curriculum designed for agency requires me to design learning that sparks engagement and connection. I can do this through provocations that let me bring all or any of my identities to the context. I can design learning experiences that allow my students to tell the stories based on their identities as soccer players, readers, being brothers, sisters, being a child or an employee. All of this relates to teaching for transfer through conceptual curriculum, as it allows me to make all of these connections from all of these different identities. Teaching for transfer through conceptual curriculum embodies constructivism beliefs. It's my agency to construct my understandings. It honors my funds of knowledge to make conceptual connections. It promotes learning beyond the confines of scheduling, where I can apply and transfer my learning in other subjects and across context in and out of school. It opens doors for social constructivism and critical race theory, which are how we start to break that concrete down and turn it into a rose garden. I believe an equitable curriculum designed for agency is brain aligned. Retta Hammonds laid out the processes of the brain that the brain goes through of input, elaboration, and review. We take in information. We connect it to prior knowledge and understandings. And we retrieve that information over time. Zoretta's Ready for Rigor framework moves the brain through this natural process. Her stages of that Ready for Rigor framework are ignite, chunk, chew, and review. In the ignite stage, we prime the brain for learning. We get it focused, we provoke it, we get it paying attention. Chunking requires us to look at curriculum in organizable chunks that can naturally connect to prior knowledge, can naturally connect to prior learning. It is also to look at how we chunk information so that the brain's working memory can handle it. The next part of this is chew. And it's here where we need to interact with others, where we need to digest the curriculum. We need to make sense of it. If we do not allow for chewing, then we do not allow for the brain to move it from the working memory to the long-term memory. Working memory then becomes overloaded, and our new learning is lost because it was not able to connect to previous learning through that chew process. And then it's critical that we review learning, that we add closure to our lessons, that we give students a chance to review content within 24 hours, that we give them another chance to review this content within the next 7 days. And each of these steps of retrieving the information from our long-term memory strengthens the neural pathway and makes that learning stronger. I believe an equitable curriculum designed for agency is collaboratively constructed based on learning outcomes and success criteria. It allows us to maintain high expectations for all students. This does not require us to dumb down anything. We set up scaffolds to include everybody. We make sure that the curriculum has multiple initial access points by making it conceptual. We develop disciplinary and transdisciplinary literacies and vocabulary. We honor the ways of knowing from the different disciplines and apprentice students to be like the experts. And we honor multiple ways of demonstrating understanding. It's important in order to maintain these high expectations that we monitor learning in an ongoing manner. This can be done through kid watching. It's also best done as an integrative process where formative assessments are not seen as an event, but as a collaborative process with students and not done to students. It is about the development of assessment-capable learners, where students set goals, design plans for meeting those goals. They can self-assess their goal, and they also can self-adjust based on their progress towards those goals. Let it be known that I am a huge fan of Bettina Love's work. And in her work, she identifies abolitionist teaching as the practice of working in solidarity with communities of color while drawing on the imagination, creativity, refusal, the remembering, visionary thinking, healing, rebellious spirit, boldness, determination, and subversiveness of abolitionists to eradicate injustice in and outside of schools. To me, this aligns well with educating for agency. That we're helping to give students the tools and dispositions to eradicate this injustice, to apply this learning in and outside of school. Bettina also says that abolitionist teaching is a way of being strategic and thoughtful. It's living and teaching for justice, even though you might not see it. that it may take decades and years and centuries to see it come to its fruition. But you know it is worth the fight, and it is the fight. It's a recognition of everyone's humanity. It's the competent and capable view of students to have voice, choice, and ownership. It's how we ensure that hope continues. This brings us to our final reflective pause. Again, to get our brains synthesizing and considering where we go from here, let's start with a short clip called This Is Me. Again, you might recognize the lyrics from The Greatest Showman, but this clip is a cover of that song and is being sung by Musicality, a group of inner city Chicago students. The clip is just over 1 minute, so it is just enough to inspire our thinking. If you need more inspiration, I've included the QR code here for the full song. Let's have a listen.
I am not a stranger to the dark. Either way, they say we don't watch your broken parts. I've learned to be ashamed of all my scars. Either way, they say no one will love you as you are. But I won't let them break me down to dust. I know that there's a place for us, for your glorious. When the sharpest words wanna cut me down, gonna send a flood, gonna drown them out. I am brave, I am bruised, I am who I'm meant to be. This is me. Look out, here I come. And I'm marching on to the beat I drum. I'm not scared to be seen. I make no apologies. This is
I find it so hard not to be inspired by that song. For our final reflective pause, let's revisit our concentric circles. Revisit your concentric circles from the opening reflection. Based on your engagement with this presentation, what would you add to each circle? Pause and consider why you chose to add those things and why you placed them where you did. Then consider what's something that you'd still like to see move further inward. Why isn't it already there? And again, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much hope do you have in moving it inward? How does that make you feel? And what will you now go and do? Again, I encourage you to pause the recording here and take some time to reflect. Wow, I know that was a lot to digest in about an hour. I want to thank you for allowing me to show you a window into my mind. Again, I'm still learning and working to refine my thinking. It's an ongoing journey, and I welcome you to continue the journey for yourself. I hope you found value in my ideas and have come away with some actionable items for your classroom and school. If I can be of any assistance in your work, please do not hesitate to reach out to me through email or Twitter. I'd love to consult with you or your school. Feel free to follow me on Twitter and Facebook. I hope this is just the beginning of a great partnership. Thank you, and please enjoy any remaining presentations as part of the INCLC Summer Institute. Thank you.